Now, struggling to access care and feeling ignored. It's estimated 187,000 people in Scotland have long COVID, but those with the condition say the Scottish Government must do more to support them. Today, a campaign group, Long COVID Scotland, took its call for action to Holyrood, meeting MSPs and Public Health Minister Jenny Minto. The Government has committed £3 million this year to respond to the disease, but as Matty Sutton reports, campaigners say the money doesn't go far enough.
Armed with a clear message, people with long COVID from across Scotland brought their battle for better services to the decision-makers' door today.
We need clear public health messaging, we need investment in research, we need accurate data on long COVID prevalence, and we need services that are designed to actually support people with long COVID.
Among those offering support was South Scotland MSP Brian Whittle, who himself has been affected by the condition.
I had issues with joint pain, chest pain, stomach pain, and went through a whole series of tests, medical tests, before it was going, yeah, it might be just long COVID. What it expressed to me and what it showed me was that the medical profession really isn't set up to deal with long COVID or even to diagnose long COVID, and we only got there by a process of elimination of everything else.
There are thought to be around 187,000 people with long COVID living in Scotland, but campaigners say that figure is out of date.
We need to gather the data better than we have been doing because, a lot of it's been left to the sufferers themselves and come up with a strategic plan to tackle this because it isn't going away.
In 2021, the Scottish Government announced a £10 million fund for health boards to provide support for those affected by long COVID. While his Public Health Minister met with members of the Long COVID Scotland group, elsewhere in Edinburgh, the First Minister insisted his government was listening.
So we have, of course, put £10 million towards addressing long COVID. That's on top of, I should say, the significant investment that we give to health boards. We have made progress. 12 out of 14 of our territorial health boards now have those long COVID pathways, and we're, of course, working on the other health boards that are remaining.
The Scottish COVID inquiry also heard evidence today on the relationship between ministers and those with the condition during the pandemic.
It has always been a struggle getting heard, recognised.
What's your impression as to why it's been a struggle?
I think there is perhaps a view that people with illness should be heard, but only so much.
The current funding for health boards to provide long COVID services is only allocated until the next election in 2026. People here want to know now what happens to them when the money runs out.
Matty Sutton. For more on the calls from those with the condition, I spoke to Freja Lundberg from Long COVID Scotland, who we've just seen in the report. Freja Lundberg, could you just first describe to me your experience in getting long COVID and how it felt?
To put long COVID succinctly, it's awful. I had COVID in January 2021 and essentially never got better. At the start of long COVID, I was sleeping 16 plus hours a day and couldn't be awake more than 4 hours at a time. I could hardly string sentences together. I couldn't really stand up without my heart rate going absolutely wild. It has really affected my life in every single way it could. It's affected relationships, work, study, everything. It does make leaving the house difficult and has meant my life is completely different to the way it looked before I had COVID.
And is that still the case now?
Yeah, I mean, my life is still entirely changed by long COVID. I still struggle with fatigue. I've developed postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome with long COVID, which essentially means my heart rises rapidly when I stand up and continues rising until I pass out. So I still sleep about 12 hours a day. I still have to be careful about pacing. So I know that being here today will take a lot out of me and it will take a while to recover after this. It has meant I've only just gone back to trying to finish my university studies in the last few months, which is an ongoing struggle just to get that done. So it's still, I'm now 3 years into long COVID and I'm still very much affected by this every single day.
How do you know you've got long COVID? How is it diagnosed?
I think I was easier. I had a positive PCR test on the 6th of January 2021 and I never got better from that. So I never improved after my initial COVID infection. So it was, I think, very easy to diagnose. It was essentially long COVID and not anything else.
And you're here now to speak to MSPs and the Scottish Government, I think, is that right?
I believe, yes, the Public Health Minister is going to drop in and see us as well.
So what is your message to the MSPs and to the Scottish Government specifically?
I mean, in short, we need the Scottish Government to take long COVID seriously and take action on long COVID. We keep hearing about the £10 million long COVID fund that they've announced. But in reality, in healthcare spending, that's really not a lot of money. In the 23-24 allocation of that fund, it amounts to £12.88 per person with long COVID. That is absolutely nothing in healthcare spending. And they keep saying it's £3 million of this fund that has been allocated for this year. That's not true. We're £300,000 short of a £3 million. And we don't know how many people have actually got long COVID. So we're basing everything off statistics from before when the ONS survey ended in February last year. We've had over a year with no accurate statistics on long COVID and COVID. So I don't know how the Scottish Government can make accurate decisions on public health without having statistics to back it up. So we know it's 187,000 when this ended, or 3.5% of the Scottish population. We don't know what it is now. If we look at America, they are estimating 6.8% of the population has long COVID. In Scotland, that would mean it's 330,000 people with long COVID. That's a huge proportion of the population, and for a group that is not being supported by the health service or the government.
So do you have a figure you would like to see spent on this, and what would it be spent on if there was extra money?
I mean, I don't have an exact figure in mind, but it needs more than £10 million to make an actual significant amount of difference. We've had various reports recently from the Alliance and Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland that show the vast majority of people with long COVID are not being supported and they're still struggling to access healthcare. At the moment, the long COVID services and different health boards vary massively. So it kind of varies from phone calls support to some are in-person services carrying out medical tests, but it's completely different across Scotland, and still some areas like Fife and Shetland don't have any long COVID service. And so many of these services are struggling with lack of funding, so staff aren't working full time. And it's also, they can't plan for what they're doing, because once this fund ends, we have no guarantees of what's going to happen to those services and where the funding is going to come from or go. So it would be an absolute disaster if these services just suddenly end, and then there's nowhere for people with long COVID to go and receive help from the medical system.
And is it your hope that this money would be spent to find a cure?
I mean, we obviously need huge amounts of investment in research on long COVID. A lot of this has been done globally, and we know so much more about COVID and long COVID now than we did in March 2020. So we know there are various things that help long COVID. We know there are medications that treat various symptoms, but the problem is accessing these treatments and understanding health professionals. That is the real struggle for people on long COVID, with people with long COVID in Scotland. It's just accessing any of this help, basically. It's so patchy and inconsistent across the country, it's really difficult.
Are any of these medications available in Scotland, or are there some that could be available that aren't?
There are medications available, but it's lack of basically doctors, GPs, etc. They don't know about these medications. They don't know huge amounts about long COVID in general. They're not being trained on long COVID. We need public health messaging for both basically the public to educate them on long COVID and the dangers of long COVID and the fact that they can develop long COVID after any number of COVID infections. But we also need better education for healthcare staff on COVID and long COVID, because right now that is not happening.
Is there any sign that any of those things are going to happen?
Unfortunately, at the moment, the truth is no. Last year, when Long COVID Scotland got funding from the Scottish Government, we ran a training session for GPs to train them on long COVID, and we had about over 400 attend, and we got so much feedback saying they were so thankful for that session because they hadn't had any of this training anywhere else. And the fact is, it shouldn't be up to us to do it, all this training and effort and advocacy. should be happening from the government. We need backing from the Scottish Government and our politicians and the health service. It can't be up to 6 people with long COVID to do all this work when it should be people that are paid to do it.
Freja Lundberg, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.